The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody to our WAN-IFRA webinar series. My name is Nicole Frankenhauser and I'm the Advisory Coordinator for WAN-IFRA Global Advisory, the consulting division for WAN-IFRA based here in Frankfurt, Germany. We're pleased to bring you today a Crowdy News sponsored webinar featuring Dr. Mario Garcia, world-renowned storyteller, editorial designer, and digital strategy consultant. Our webinars are active platforms for audience engagement, so I encourage you to ask Mario your questions. You can find at the bottom right of your control panel a box that is labeled questions, so just please type in your question, and after Mario concludes the presentation, we will begin the Q&A session. Your panelists today include myself, our lead presenter, Dr. Mario Garcia, and Allison Barr. Allison is the VP of Marketing and Product Management for Crowdy News. She oversees all aspects of marketing to support their global sales team. Allison, we'd like to hear more from our sponsor, so please take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. We're delighted to have the opportunity to sponsor this webinar with WAN-IFRA and Dr. Garcia today. Briefly, Crowdy News is an AI-driven, user-generated content curation engine that helps publishers bring the voice of the crowd from social media onto their owned and operated sites. We work with brands around the world like Trinity Mirror, Singapore Press Holdings, Trunk, and more to help them drive engagement and improve conversion on their sites. Next slide, please. Our featured presenter today is Dr. Mario Garcia. He's the Senior Advisor on News Design and an Adjunct Professor at Columbia University School of Journalism. Dr. Garcia has been involved with the redesign and rethink of more than 700 publications in 120 countries, including the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. In today's session, Dr. Garcia will cover the top 3 most relevant topics for publishers in 2017, including visual storytelling via mobile, daily email briefings, and sponsored content. Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia, for joining us today, and I'll turn the session over to you now.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's a real pleasure to say hello to all of you from New York City, and I hope that this presentation will be engaging for you, and that if you have any questions, we will handle them at the end of this presentation. What I'm trying to do here today is to summarize primarily a workshop that I do for newspaper companies around the world, which usually takes 2 days, and we're going to narrow this down to about 35 minutes. So bear with me, but again, I will be available to answer your questions not only here today, but through email and so on. So we are going to present you now the 3 pillars of publishing, and I will try to move as fast as I can, but knowing that at the end you can also ask me your questions and so on. We're going to deal with a subject that is very dear to me. It's what is happening today. Let's see, am I going the right way? Yeah, here we are. With visual storytelling. And I have been in this business 42 years, and I have seen tremendous change in those years. But nothing like the rise of mobile, which is really what is happening today. No matter where you turn, if you take a look around you, you are going to see people connected, reading. So the consumption of the content that we produce is great. When people of my generation, especially journalists, find me and say, oh, Mario, you know, the good old days are gone and this and that, I say, no, the good old days are here again, or even better, because we all train to tell stories. And right now you can tell stories through various platforms in a variety of ways, not just through headlines and text. But whatever you do, one of the things that I want you to take with you today is that whether it's the writing or the designing, you have to start designing for mobile first. You have to start with the smallest canvas and then go from there. We have examples such as the Upshot from the New York Times, where in one single screen, they can present you what may be a complicated story, how will the Senate of the US vote on a certain issue? With one paragraph or 5 lines and just a simple graphic, they tell you this. But this is the prelude to the big story. The long narrative has not disappeared. The big investigative report has not disappeared. But what is new is that you as journalists have to prepare what I call the little tapa that whets your appetite to then eat the big paella at the end. And that is what many newsrooms have not gotten used to it yet. It's not very easy journalism when you have to prepare just a small appetizer like what you see on the screen, but then develop that story further in a more traditional way, the long narrative. And so that brings us to the whole idea of the challenges. The homepage is not what it used to be. People are not coming to the homepage of your newspaper the way they used to even 2 or 3 years ago. They are coming through social media. That's what I like, a quote from one of the best editors I've worked with from Aftenposten in Norway, Espen Elger Hansen, who told me one day, we produce 1,000 front pages every day, because if your homepage is the face of your brand and people are coming into an article, they went into Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and then coming to this article, each article represents the front page of your newspaper. It's the brand, it's the first contact with the brand. And so one of the things we have been doing, working together with Espen, is to perhaps think of a system of cards where you don't have a home page, but the link is very visual, like what you see here. Instead of having just a link on the line that you click and go to the story, beginning to make those links more visual, and then those cards will appear on the screen like what you see here. Instead of a home page, the algorithms will move those cards. So every time an editor updates a story, the card moves to the next position. You can even have advertising, as you can see here, in position. But these are the experiments that are taking place to face the challenge of people not coming directly into a homepage. And where are they coming to? They are coming to mobile devices, specifically the phone. I call it, and I tell my students at Columbia, that this is the journalism of everywhereness. You never have any idea where people are reading your content. Obviously, traditionally, people would read a newspaper with coffee in the morning. It was a ritual for the family. You will get from page 1 to page 32. Then you'll go to work and the news would abandon you. Right now, it's 24 hours. It's a cycle of you reading, the consumer, the user reading the news anywhere. But as I compare these two images here, one from the 1930s below, things have not changed that much. There are certain times of the day when we would like to get information. And just like we used to grab that newspaper in the morning on the way to work in the turn of the century, we now do the same with our mobile devices. You have got to be there. You have got to be present to put your brand in front of these people at the times when they're seeking the information. And even though we live in this media quintet, we present information to the watch, to the phone, print, online, and tablet. Mobile, the phone is the one platform where a lot of this action is. In all of my projects right now, even if they just ask me to concentrate on one platform, I bring in the idea of the media quintet. You have to take your brand and you have to show it out there and tell people, we are going to present the news to you, bring the news to you, when you want it, where you want it, whether you are reading an alert on your watch or whether you're reading it on your phone or on a more lean back platform like the tablet or the print. Almost every major media outlet will do this. I always tell my clients, in terms of marketing, never advertise one platform. Whether you advertise on billboards, airport signs, trains, buses, always show all that you offer in all of the platforms. It is a multi-platform world. But how we tell stories in this environment is one of the most fascinating things of what I do today, of what we need to understand today, that the mobile storytelling experience, how a story flows on a mobile device like a phone, for example, is very different from the way we present stories in other platforms such as print. And what really surprises me, and I have been studying this for the last 6 months rather extensively, is that it is an intuitive process. When children start writing, they will write exactly like what you see on the screen right now. A child is telling a story about the zoo. The cages are too small. The tiger was crying. Immediately, the drawing of the tiger crying is there. And then you continue. We don't put the images on one side and the text on the other. And this is the way that we are beginning in 2017 to tell stories on these devices, where people scroll, where there is this motion of scrolling, and you don't need to have a cluster of photos or videos and then the text someplace else. The New York Times is doing this probably better than anybody else. I urge you to take a look at what they do on a daily basis, doing what I call linear storytelling. Look at this example. The headline is "My Journey into Aleppo, Watching a Moonscape of War Turn into a Functioning City." Before you read anything, you see a video. But immediately after that, the writer begins to tell you, this is a video that I took, this is how the story begins. And then you mix the text and the imagery, because that's the way we communicate here. It's a very linear, vertical motion where the narrative leads to the art. The New York Times has developed a palette of such stories. One of the most interesting palettes is on breaking news, what immediately they tell you what we know and what we don't. And so you can see that there is this immediacy for this platform. And eventually you'll be reading the big story about this tumult in Turkey. You will be later on in the day reading this. We have these two tempos, the now and the later. And all journalists, all editors have an obligation to realize that here is the fast tempo. Maybe in the tablet, maybe later in the print, you have this lower tempo. They also deal a lot with videos and photos in what I call the cinematographic element, the cinematographic essay. And this variety of stories has been developed by the New York Times over a period of time, and it works very well. You can have a breaking news explainer, something is happening, and you're explaining it as it goes with the help of social media as well. Or you can have a photo story where all you do is weave together, but not in the photo gallery where you click, where you scroll to the right. The idea is to put one image after the other, exactly the way you communicate yourself. You can have maps, you can have graphics. The sky is the limit for how you can tell stories here. And you can do the ultimate multimedia story like this one about the new Panama Canal, where the staff has spent 6 weeks working on this. And you're going to combine videos with graphics, with text. But the linear thinking is there. Notice that when you communicate with your friends on WhatsApp and you're really telling what you're doing, you would say, oh, I just arrived at the restaurant. We were served the best sushi in the world. Photo of the sushi dish. Then you continue. So intuitively, the way we communicate on this platform is you tell the story and you show, showing and reading at the same time. We must, for this platform, write and edit in that same way. It is also very important to extend your brand and to tell people at certain times of the day what it is that you are doing. And in that sense, the second pillar is the briefings. The first pillar that I've talked about is the whole idea of linear thinking, writing stories to accommodate this platform, not writing a story that you dump into every one of your platforms. You write the story for print and then you put it into the phone. The briefings or email newsletters, it's really, they have taken off in 2017 because they are a way for you to tell me, the busy user, the busy subscriber, all the goodies that you have going on, that you are curating for me and you're presenting to me. First and foremost, briefings are a way to curate information for people who are very busy. We all want to have an editor, a knowledgeable editor, tell us these are the 10 things that you need to know before you go to work. or at the end of the day, this is what happened today. Before you retire tonight, you should be aware that this happened. I always think that the Wall Street Journal had the original briefing. I worked with this newspaper in several incarnations, bringing the Wall Street Journal to color, changing the size, making it a tabloid for Europe and Asia. And I learned doing this project that the What's News, which dates back decades, like 8 decades, was created by an editor 80-some years ago because he thought that people were very busy, business readers were very busy, and they needed to have on the front page of the Wall Street Journal a What's News. To this day, it is the most read part of the newspaper. People get to the What's News, and immediately they get an idea of what is happening in very short 4 or 5 line summaries. So this is the original briefing. Briefings are mini newspapers. They give you a quick preview of what we should know at a certain time of the day. I recommend them in the very early morning and about 6 o'clock in the evening. Every single day, I wake up here in New York City to the New York Times morning briefing. And it really tells me, sets the agenda, but not just in terms of news. It will give me a recipe. Maybe it's a cold day and it tells you this will be a good soup to cook today. Maybe it will tell me specifics of interest to me. I'm a runner. So it might tell me this is the best new pair of shoes that you should get for running. So the morning briefing can be customized as well. And it can also have a sponsor, somebody who will pay for it. It could be an airline, it could be a bank. But the idea is that briefings have become a way for your brand to present itself to very busy people whose attention and time has a lot of competition from others, to really grasp them, grab them and say, this is what is happening today. When I'm in Europe, I get a morning briefing, European edition, and I also get all the breaking news alerts, which I usually read on my watch, on my Apple Watch. But these are ways to keep your brand in front of the reader all day long. Why? In the days when we relied on print, the contact of the audience with your product was every 24 hours, you will open up that newspaper with coffee in the morning. Right now, the statistics tell us that the average person who subscribes to your brand may come to see that brand as many as 45 to 50 times in a day. So, by that analogy, one day in the digital mobile world for your brand is the equivalent of a month and a half of print only. So the idea is to keep your brand out there. That's what I always tell my clients. Develop new products. It's not difficult. It's not costly to start a briefing, to develop a new product where you put your brand out there. The idea is that you must become essential. This is the evening briefing. The New York Times, just about 6 o'clock, will tell me, good evening, here's the latest. And notice the personalization, the idea of putting an arm around you. I never expected the New York Times, which has always been sort of the great old lady, to say good evening to me or good morning to me. But in the new mobile environment, it's a conversation. You don't present news. You have a conversation. You engage with your users. And part of that is a chatty style, a conversational style. Good morning, good evening, how are you? Make yourself a soup. It's going to be a cold day today. Take out your umbrella. It's going to be raining in the afternoon. It really is like a neighbor who likes you has come into your home to tell you, hey, you need to know this, that, and the other, and I give you the recipe for my soup as well. There are many ways to do this. You can do it with headlines of the top news, but in a curated way. If you present 25 headlines, you have left me out in the cold. I want 5 to 10 that are curated, the real things that I should know today. Different papers do it differently. The Financial Times will have one devoted to the U.S. economy. So if you are interested in business, if you are a reader of the Financial Times in the U.S., this is the briefing for you. It tells you 5 to 10 stories that you need to know. The Guardian does it in a very graphic way. I mean, the Thursday briefing here, in this case, tells you about the terrorist attack in London last week. But the moment you read these briefings, and let me tell you, you become addicted to some, and there are some that never catch up with you, that never become essential. In order to become essential, the headlines have to grab you. You have to wake up every day and say, I would like to see what the Guardian or the Times or the Financial Times is telling me that I need to know. One of my favorite in a non-traditional way, and I suggest that you all should subscribe, it's free, is Quartz, QZ.com. This one is interesting because it presents the stories that are not anyplace else. Actually, they call them obsessions. So they could be lifestyle stories. They could be about a new automobile being created in some European country that nobody has ever heard of. Quartz has been very successful, and they always have a sponsor daily. The daily brief is sponsored by. So they find an advertiser to really pay for it. I suggested also as a textbook of the best headlines in the business. Headlines that even if you're very busy, you really are seduced to read that story. And then one that is very local, and I suggested for regional newspapers, the Los Angeles Times doesn't want to compete with the New York Times or the Washington Post with national news, but they tell you essential California. If you're interested in what is happening in California, not just with local news, politics, and Hollywood, you turn to the LA Times Essential California, which comes once a day in the morning. Very interesting material. So you could have a briefing capitalizing on the best that you have. If you think that you are the essential Uganda, or you are the essential Cape Town, or the essential whatever, if what is your forte, that is what you go for. That's where your brand and what you do best can come together. This is worth doing, not only worth doing. I tell my clients, I don't think you have a choice. You need to put your brand out there at least once a day in some kind of briefing so that people know that you're curating material for them, that you are worried about them. And if you can find a sponsor, so much better. And my project in Norway has been one of the most fascinating for me because there I have worked with this editor, Espen Hansen, who is very clever. And when we began the process, he had seen the work I had done with the newspaper El Tiempo of Colombia in South America, where that newspaper in 2011, 6 years ago already, went through a total transformation. And I was allowed to really work with that team. And I said, nobody wants 6 supplements or 6 sections of a newspaper Monday to Friday in print. It's too much to read. So we condensed. What would a modern newspaper do? 3 sections. What you must read, what you must know, what you must do. And so Espen was fascinated by that concept. And in 2016, I worked with him to bring it to Norway. He added something else. The 4th bubble there is surprise me. Every single day, there must be one story that you did not read on your mobile platforms before you went to bed. And that is part of what makes print interesting. So you can see on the left that the printed layout calls for must know, must do, must read. All 3 of these segments are always going to be there. Sometimes the must do is the lead, and the must read might be the lead tomorrow. On this day, the must know, there was a big news. That is exactly what occupied the largest space. But that same concept is applied to the website. And so it becomes an overall philosophy. You need to develop an overall philosophy in the newsroom according to platforms. You do a workshop where you say, how will breaking news travel today from the phone to the tablet to the online to print? Even my students at Columbia, their midterm semester assignment was a breaking news story, and they always have to tell me, how will you cover that story tomorrow in the printed newspaper? So that's very important. But it's also important to have this tempo about giving stories a longer shelf life. Not everybody has time to read all that you have in the course of a day. So we're beginning to see what you see on the screen right now, stories you may have missed from the Financial Times. And these stories are great interviews, great investigative stories that maybe you were too busy yesterday, you missed them. So keep them there for 6, 7 days in case you missed it. I always say that there are now 3 tempos for the news. The lean forward, where we're leaning forward on this device all day long, every time we have a chance. The lean back, which is, okay, now that I have time, I'm going to read that story. But there is always a third tempo. That's the story I missed, I'm going to read it. So it's very important that you do that. At the same time, and this is probably, other than linear storytelling, one of the most important things I tell you today, you need to develop the ability to customize content on these platforms. The Aftenposten is testing this in Norway very successfully. What you see on the left is Susan, a rare visitor, an all-around reader, gets a certain set of recommendations. Maybe she likes women's news, fitness, and cooking. But Paul, her neighbor, wants a heavy dose of sports, wants European Union news, political news, maybe he also wants cooking. And so the algorithms are there to assist you doing this. You need to optimize the engagement of your people. So that's why I also recommend that you have one basket in your mobile unit that is for in case you missed it. Experimented with different algorithms to optimize for engagement, editorial footprint, and the balance we want. In other words, at the same time, the criticism of customization is that the world needs to know certain stories. We can all just go there for what we like. It's like if, as a child, you sat there and your mother gave you ice cream and sweets all the time, and you never had spinach. Well, you need to have spinach too. So how do you put spinach into the news menu? Well, you say 5 stories that you must know today. And even if it's a customized edition, you are going to try to feed me the green vegetables that I need. And I think that all of this is so new. This is all so different for newsrooms that are used to coming in there to plan tomorrow's newspaper. One size that fits all, it doesn't work that way. And the newspapers that will die have nothing to do with print. The newspapers that will die because they did not update it the way they tell stories. They did not realize that each platform is different, and they did not develop a kitchen where you could prepare the little appetizer, but at the same time build all the way to the main 7-course dinner. Not easy to do, my friends. Not easy to do, but it can be done. And I think that that's what's fascinating about the work that I do today. For example, in Norway, how can you tell a complicated stories in 2 or 3 screens? Can we visualize the most dangerous roads in Norway? Yes, but this is a story that for you is a big story. You will have this story big in the newspaper tomorrow. It will be an investigative story, but you tease me today with 2 or 3 screens on this platform. We are also learning, by the way, that on this platform, 1 headline, 1 image per screen is better. People know that scrolling will give you the next. And here, don't let anybody tell you that they only scroll 3 times. That was online. On the phone, people scroll and scroll as long as they're interested in what you're presenting. Can we explain how climate change affects the wildlife in Norway on a mobile screen? Yes, in 3 screens, you give me a taste, the little chapa, the little appetizer for this story. But this is a big story that you're working on. That, people, is what we're talking about. This is the best time to tell all of these stories. But you cannot do them only the big story that you work on for 3 weeks and then you publish it. You can do these teasers 3 days before the story is published. You can give me on Tuesday 3 screens on climate change. And then on Thursday, you do 3 more. And on Friday, for the weekend, the big story on climate change is coming. these are like trailers for the movies. But somebody has to produce it, somebody has to do it, and you have to do it in simple terms for the small screen. That's why when you have a big project in your newspaper, when a reporter, a writer says, I'm going to do a big story about the environment in South Africa or the environment in the US, well, that story begins in a planning session with the technical people present, the visual designer present, and you start designing for here before you go to the big landscape. Very important point. You write, you create, you design for here, and then it goes into the other platforms. Can we explain how the Middle East is changing on a mobile screen? Yes, you can. And I think if you look at Snapchat, you will realize, if you look at the Snapchat, you will realize that for 14, 15, and 16-year-olds, this is the way stories are told already. In fact, in Snapchat Discover, you already have many titles joining there, and they don't reproduce the stories that they have on the newspaper. The New York Times will join Snapchat Discover soon, and they will tell stories in 2 or 3 screens for an audience that is teenagers. My grandchildren are all into Snapchat. That is an audience that you wish to cultivate. But how do you get to them? Even without Snapchat, you have to start producing these very simple, visual, quick to review elements on the mobile screen. Can we explain the Estonian tragedy from 1995 on a mobile screen? Yes, you can do it, very simply. But this is the work of 2 people working together, the journalist and the visual storyteller. This is what it takes. It's a team of 2, and then the story comes together. You can give your readers a sense, an overview on a mobile screen. In Aftenposten, this is taking place. The Scandinavians, I have to say, are probably ahead of the pack in this type of storytelling. You find it also in Sweden with Svenska Dagbladet, with Dagens Nyheter, in Norway with VG. All those Scandinavian newspapers, Berlinsk in Denmark, they are ahead of the pack in terms of telling stories perfectly well and adaptable to the small screen. And notice that most of these newspapers, or in fact all of these newspapers, have paywalls. They charge for their content. And so in the case of the Aftenposten, readers have a way of buying a package that is only the digital daily newspaper, or the weekend printed newspaper and daily digital, or just digital. And the subscriptions at this newspaper in a country of only 4 million people is 100,000 purely digital. But after 7 years of decline, there is an 8% increase in subscriptions overall at Aftenposten, because they have learned to tell stories across platforms. So that brings us to the 3rd pillar. And the 3rd pillar is a fascinating topic, which is sponsored content, also referred to as native advertising. This got a start maybe 4 years ago, but in 2017 is beginning to peak, is beginning to become not only a favorite with users, with readers, but also a way to monetize your operation. Helsingin Sanomat in Finland has been one of the pioneers doing this, but this is now coming to the level of regional newspapers, local newspapers, and again, I turn to Quartz, because Quartz, which is QZ.com, every single day in their briefing, they will have sponsored content, what you see on the screen, sponsored content by the government of Japan. And if you go in there, you read the story directly on the government of Japan website. So sponsored content is also a reality around the world. I have just completed a wonderful project on sponsored content with the Gulf News of Dubai. They, like the New York Times and others, have created their own studio inside the Gulf News, which is called Reach by Gulf News, in which they now offer creative services to their advertisers. And it begins with social media. For example, here are samples sponsored by MAT, which is a bank, a financial institution. So these are the promos that you will begin to develop to tell the story later. You label it sponsor. It's very important that all these advertising be labeled sponsor. And you begin to mix that with the rest of your content. Here you have on their website opinion, weekend review, but then sponsored content always uses the orange element. You give it a typeface and a look that is different from the rest, but it really, the stories, the real key to sponsored content is the story has to pass the test. If this newspaper would not publish this story in any of its sections, then it will not go. Sponsored content is not advertorials, it's not public relations, it's not traditional advertising. It's a well-written story that appears sponsored by an advertiser, but that gives you information, it entertains you, it informs you. You need to simplify the user experience, and I think that this is a very important point. A lot of the websites I see for newspapers are complicated. A lot of what you put in the phone is complicated. I always like what I see in this magazine, real simple, because not only the design is simple, but they teach you how to simplify your life. In our own Garcia Media website, which we redesigned in January of this year, we went from 29 different screens to only 3. It was painful. Of course it is painful. But we have analytics. If people were not looking at half of these screens, why would we have all of this in there? So take a look at your website. You know, do what I call sunrise and sunset. Don't just continue to load it up with information, some of which people are not stopping to look at. The real test for simplicity is a style book. The style sheet for the Garcia Media website is one screen. The colors, the typeface, and the icons, period. There is nothing else. This is what gives continuity. Forget the style guides that were 25 pages, 35 screens. Simplicity is the key. Simplicity for people to come into your brand, do what they want to do, and get out and be satisfied so that they will come back tomorrow. Talking about simplicity, Axios, which premiere, Axios.com, which premiere January 18, really is an example of how to create a simple environment to present the news. And part of the reason that these new startups are so simple is that they don't have the elephant in the room. There was never any print associated with this. Whether we accept it or not, most of us in a legacy organization still cater to print. The elephant is in the room. What are we going to do in tomorrow's newspaper? You see the frames on the wall of the grandfathers and great-grandfathers who created this newspaper. The ghosts are there. Axios began in January. It never had a print edition. And inevitably, if you don't have the legacy to worry about, you aim for simplicity. What can we do to tell this story in simple terms very quickly? So what are the digital design challenges to summarize here? First of all, the biggest challenge is writing, creating, designing for the smallest of devices, which is the phone. It is a challenge, but it's not difficult if you understand how people manipulate around here. The key tip that I can give you, one idea, one image per screen, not 25 photos the size of stamps on one screen. So I get lost. People will scroll. Clicking is out, scrolling is in. So you need to create new storytelling formats that adapt to mobile platforms. That's key. You need to create a simple user experience. Make it easy for me. Don't make it complicated. Eliminate all the extras that you have in your website that you've been carried for years, since 1994 when the internet began, simply because you do. Do a cleanup. Design a visual brand that extends across platforms with instant recognition. Something else, if your logo is a very big, complicated logo, try to create a simple one. Letters do very well. That's why the New York Times uses the T in a circle for most of their mobile, for videos and so on. You need to, at this point, hit the reset button. Create a new visual for your brand that, without abandoning the old, introduces something new and adaptable that gives you instant recognition. And allow for the strong presence of video, and very soon for virtual reality. I have been involved in this fascinating project about what would a newspaper, a virtual reality newspaper be like? Fascinating. You would walk into the news. But that's another story for another day. I welcome your questions. It's been a pleasure for me to talk to you, and I turn it over to the moderators for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mario, for that interesting presentation on the 3 priorities for publishers in 2017. We actually did get some questions while you were making the presentation, so I think we'll get started with that now. But
all right.
Yes, yeah, and then in case we don't have enough time to answer all the questions live in this webinar, Dr. Garcia has said that he will answer questions offline. So we will start with the first question that was submitted. Dr. Garcia, when or what is the best opportunity to create engagement with the entirety of what we used to call the Sunday centerpiece?
The question is, when is the best time, or?
Yeah, when or what is the best opportunity to create engagement with what we used to call the Sunday centerpiece?
I think that, and this is a great first question, because this ties entirely into what I was saying about telling the story on 3 screens. That engagement begins in the middle of the week. If you know that you're going to have this Sunday centerpiece, an exclusive interview with someone, or a big investigative report, you begin introducing the idea to me in no more than 3 screens Wednesday or Thursday, the latest. And then you already have, you've created already the visuals for this story. So some of the visuals appear here that you will not repeat later on. Chances are you have 35 photos for this story and you're going to use maybe 10. So use some of those to tease me, to do mini trailers of that centerpiece. I would begin Wednesday. The best time to introduce these promos is during the lunch hour, when people are really relaxing and eating perhaps and looking at this. So never introduce trailers at 6 o'clock in the morning, and never introduce them at 6 o'clock in the evening when people are rushing home and busy with family and so on. Lunchtime, the latest at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, beginning on a Wednesday or Thursday, best time to do that.
Thank you for answering that question. Next one is, I think it's related to your newsletter topic. Is there a limit for a briefer? Should it always have 5 W's, 1 H? So who, what, when, where, why, and how?
Well, you know, this is the old formula of doing this, and you're going to have to tell me the essentials of the story, but make it more conversational. Tie it to perhaps yesterday's news. Do a conversation with the reader as opposed to just writing a dull 5W and the H lead. How can you incorporate these elements of the story and at the same time put the arm around me and telling me, sometimes, for example, there has been a terrorist attack, and obviously you have to deal with the facts. 12 people were injured, 3 people were killed. This is where it happened, the where, and so on. But maybe that line comes in the briefing after another element of terrorism. And so you may tie them together and say, and this, speaking about terrorism, comma, yesterday this happened. So in other words, you can really, in this particular mobile storytelling, you can be more chatty. You can be more conversational. You don't have to be ruled by the news writing tips of 1918, not at all. But at the same time, you must tease me into wanting to read the story later on. That's the focus. It's not just to tell you that there's been this attack. You also need to tell me, our analysts will be discussing this on the opinion page. You really use that to make me want to come back to read more.
All right, thank you. This is a question from the audience. Regarding the mobile presentation that consists of 3 images, would it be as effective to rotate those 3 images on a single screen?
Well, I presented them on a single screen, and maybe that's one way to do it. Never thought of that. But I think that if you're presenting this on the phone, you have to make sure that even when you have responsive design, they will appear one under the other. So there will be a scrolling effect. I still think that you design one per screen and usually not more than 3. That's very interesting. You're going to have maybe 3 or 4 seconds of attention for that. And again, the idea is to promote that this is coming, that the big story is coming, that you're telling me this in simple terms. For a model on how to do this well, look at Snapchat. They do it fantastically well. But maybe you can do it in one screen. I will have to see it.
Okay, Dr. Garcia, this is a little bit of a long question, so I'll try to go through it slow. You did not mention other ways of monetizing other than subscription and advertising. We are having a great experience at Estado de Sao Paulo in Brazil, selling leads, helping brands with their digital properties, selling content, etc., becoming real partners of our former advertisers. This is working very well on verticals like cars. Now we are bringing this model to other verticals. Do you have any experience like those, any benchmarks you can share? By the way, you are brilliant as always.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's good to hear early in the morning here in a cold New York City morning. I think that, yeah, what you're doing, and I do follow the Brazilian newspapers, having worked in Brazil extensively, I know that they are also very innovative. Specifically in Sao Paulo, I've always been fascinated both with Estado and FOLA with what they do in terms of classified. I mean, where you might have on a weekend 3 sections of real estate and 2 sections of automobiles. But yes, I think that there are experiments like what you're mentioning. I have seen some of those in newspapers in Scandinavia as well. VG, for example, will do it. And newspapers like the Bild Zeitung in Germany go into those directions. But they also, one of the things that is happening is events. They get very involved with specific events that they sponsor that with their advertisers. So you develop the ability to engage with your advertisers by creating events. But verticals with real estate, with automobile, those things are really fertile ground for you to also work with sponsored content. And I did not mention very specifically another monetizing element. There are 2 things that I did not mention in detail. Paywalls, obviously. 76 of American newspapers now have some form of paywall. It's taken a long time to get here, with many of them blocking access after 5 or 6 articles. But the other one, the other trend is the customization, which I did emphasize. Customization, and advertisers particularly like the customization because then they can target a certain segment of the population. Women 25 to 35-year-olds, one specific ethnic group, younger adults, older adults. So advertising is having quite an interesting era of experimentation, and I'm happy to hear that my friends in Brazil are at the head of this.
Us too. Okay, we have time for a few more questions. They're now flooding in. I'll read the next one. Mario, do I have to customize every content piece for distribution channels, i.e. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc.?
Well, you know, I think that this is a subject that elicits a lot of debate because, for example, the New York Times has now announced that they will customize beginning in June. Mm-hmm. Once they announce this, the first reaction from readers has been, I am not stupid. Don't curate, don't customize for me. I know exactly what I want to read in the newspaper. And I like one of the glories of the printed newspaper specifically is the element of serendipity. The fact that you begin to read a printed newspaper or magazine and you will find surprises that you were not looking for. It's just like the supermarket. You went there to get milk and bread and you end up with 5 bags of things that appeal to you when you bought them. It's the same thing. In customization, you may miss the surprises, the serendipity. So I would say that you have to be careful how you handle it, but you have to focus. For example, some of my clients now are very intent on beginning to attract 16 to 20-year-olds. That's a very difficult audience. They don't come to print at all. They don't come to newspapers at all. but they come to Instagram and they come to Snapchat. And so to me, it is worth, if you want a specific target of the population, to do that. But you can do this with every article, and you cannot really go crazy, because right now we have Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter. Heaven knows what we will have 2 years from now. Others are coming. And so you have to be focused. For some clients, the idea is to attract 45 to 55-year-olds. Not everybody wants to attract the 16-year-olds. So where are the 45 to 55-year-olds who are really middle-aged adults, who have the money, who have the means, and who grew up somehow reading newspapers, and their family read newspapers? That is a very interesting target for many of my clients right now. Not everyone wants millennials only. They are very interested in this last group of people who grew up with newspapers. And so they are now 45 to 55. Don't forget that group. So if you know that they're concentrating primarily, they are on Facebook, then go there. But you need to work with your marketing people to find the target, the focus for you, and then go after that. A newspaper right now that is for everybody is for nobody. So you have to find out, what is my forte? What is it that people will pay us to give them? What is it that we can do better than anybody else? And if the answer to those questions is difficult, you're in trouble. If you are doing it right, the answer should be very quick. We are the best in doing this. And once you do that, what is, I always use the elevator analogy. If you are in a crowded elevator, you all try to, open your arms a little bit. If you were to open your arms a little bit in a crowded market, who would you attract? What space would you gain? If the answer is 45 to 55-year-olds, Facebook, Twitter, perhaps. If it's under that, Instagram, Snapchat is where you will find these people. And so don't try to be all things to all people, because that's a difficult task, But at the end of the story, I want to make sure that before the webinar is over, I mentioned that the one element that has not changed since I began my career 43 years ago is the story. You must have a good story. Then maybe it's not visual, maybe it's not beautifully presented, but people will stay with you. Every single day, you have to have 2 or 3 stories that are yours and yours alone, that nobody else had. Enterprise in journalism. In a world where there are stories everywhere, this is more difficult than when I began my career at the Miami News of 1967. And so you need to be aware of this. Not a day should go by without you, if you are the responsible editor, or maybe if you're a reporter attending this webinar, asking the question, what story did I contribute that nobody else had? That is the key today. And if you have that, you're in business. Regardless of the platform, you're in business.
All right, thank you. And we have time for one more question before wrapping up our hour. We have a question on writing for different formats. How feasible is it for the same person to do it? For instance, covering the World Economic Forum or even a major accident. Would it be better for different people to be writing for the different formats, considering the styles have to be different? And how will it square up with downsizing of the workforce that is happening around the world?
The good news is that one person should do it all. And that's what we are training at Columbia, that the same person, I tell my students, you must go from a tweet to a multimedia story. When they present the project to me, it cannot be, oh, professor, and then talk endlessly. Give me 140 characters of what your story is. Then I will see that story developing all the way to a multimedia story. It takes training. And that is primarily, I have been known as a designer for all these 43 years or whatever, and yet most of what I'm doing right now is a combination of storytelling and visual storytelling. The average writer takes to this. Those writers of the New York Times that are reporting from Aleppo and so on, these are seasoned writers in their 50s. who grew up writing the incredibly long story. The stories are still long, but they are learning themselves that they will take a picture there, they will do a video here. You weave the pieces together. The telling of stories is not just through words, it's through the combination. But 2 years ago, a multimedia story was where the writer wrote the story, gave it to the editor, and the editor would call the visual people and say, okay, let's put some videos in here. So you will stick a video in the middle of the story that repeated what was in the story. You don't do this anymore. Now the writer is in charge. Sit with the visual storyteller and say, okay, so this part I'm not going to do in writing. I'm going to just use the video. And then I continue with a narrative. And then there's audio. You know, you could hear the children in Aleppo singing, audio. Then you continue. And this, the way to practice this, and the way I do it in my workshops, for example, in the era of the new journalism, there was a famous story by Gay Talese, published in Esquire magazine. You can access it, titled Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. It became the ultimate example of what came to be known as the new journalism. I give that to my students. It's only text. And I say, how would Frank Sinatra Has a Cold be presented in the mobile age? The sky is the limit. The students come in there, and obviously when Frank Sinatra talks about a song that he likes, you hear 35 seconds of the song. When he talks about this actress came and visited me, you have a photo of the event. So you are weaving the narrative with the other pieces. This is the new way of telling stories. But it doesn't involve many people. It involves training the people you have. Is everybody going to be up to this? No. I'm old enough to tell you that it doesn't happen that way. I am also old enough to tell you that I'm 70 years old and I'm very much into all of this. So don't go by age. There are 39-year-olds who don't want to hear any of this. And there are 60-year-olds in your team that are crazy to jump into this and write stories like this. So I hope that this has inspired you to go on to this. And I hope that you will send me other questions. If you have them, I will answer them gladly.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Garcia, for such an informative presentation. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our audience that has joined us from all over the world today. We've had over 115 attendees live, so it's been great to have you all join us. I wanted to present more information to follow up after this webinar has ended. Tomorrow, I will be sending a takeaways email featuring top 5 takeaways from this presentation, along with the recording. If you would like a copy of the presentation slides, or you have additional questions you would like Dr. Garcia to answer offline, I encourage you to email hello@crowdynews.com. Mario will be receiving those questions and he will be answering them later off of this webinar. In addition, if you'd like more information about Crowdy News or to get a custom demo, also please email hello@crowdynews.com. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank our sponsor, Crowdy News, for kindly supporting the webinar. It's been an amazing experience with you, Dr. Garcia, today, and we hope that our audience also had an enjoyable experience. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. And until next time, we'll see you then at WAN-IFRA webinar series.